Welcome to the stream. I'm Ahmed Shahabuddin. It's been 10 days since earthquakes caused catastrophic damage in northwest Syria, leaving thousands dead and millions displaced. Homes, hospitals, and roads have been destroyed, and families are grieving loved ones while trying to survive the aftermath themselves. Today, we ask, why aren't Syrians getting the help they need, and what can be done about it? Let's start today's conversation with a video comment sent to us from Zaina Erhaim.
I believe the main reason for not getting the very much needed aid into northern Syria is not the current war situation, nor the status of the border. It is mainly the lack of will and the lack of interest by the international community to help the Syrians who are living inside. I think the whole world has got used to Syrians being killed, and for that not to be a big deal. And certainly the bureaucracy of the UN that doesn't take into consideration the urgency of such a crisis. If there was a will, heavy equipment would have been passed through Turkish border into northern Syria, and thousands of lives could have been saved, but that didn't happen.
Joining us to discuss from Chicago, Dr. Zahir Sahlul, president of MedGlobe. In Amsterdam, Sherwan Qasim, a member of the emergency support team from Doctors Without Borders. And with us from London, Reem Turkmani, director of the Syria Conflict Research Program at the London School of Economics. And of course, we want you to join the conversation as always, so be sure to share your thoughts and questions with us on YouTube. Dr. Zahir, I should say, can we start just by laying out the scale, the sheer scale of this protracted conflict and crisis?
Thank you for having me. As everyone knows, probably everyone knows that Syria has been going through a very painful civil war for the past 12 years. This area that was impacted mostly by the earthquake in northwest of Syria has 4.2 million people. Half of them are displaced from other regions in Syria. The number of Syrians who were impacted by the earthquake is close to 9 million, including 3.5 million Syrian refugees who live in southern Turkey. Many of them have been killed because of the earthquake. And you have an area that was disconnected from the outside world for the past 10 years or so, has been bombed frequently by Russia and the Assad regime. Hospitals have been bombed, so hospitals are built into basements or field hospitals. They don't have enough infrastructures for cleaning of the water. Electricity is sparse. And now you have this large magnitude earthquake. The area in Syria has not been hit with an earthquake in this magnitude for the past 200 years. So you have shortage of medical supplies, you have shortage of tents, you have now more than 50,000 families who are displaced suddenly. The weather is very cold, and then you have the impact of the earthquake that will last for a few years from now. In addition, on top of that, the lack of interest from the international community that Zaina have mentioned in the video.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you summing it up for us there. And, you know, Sherwan, when we talk about the lack of will, the lack of interest, obviously that factors in, but there's also the logistics. I mean, it took 192 hours, that's 8 full days, for the first UN convoy to enter through Bab al-Hawa. I mean, many would see this as a obvious and blatant failure of the Syrian people in terms of bringing them aid. Where do you put the main barriers, and what concerns you most, Sherwan?
Yeah, as Dr. Zahir said, actually, the problem is that this area has been through 12 years of conflict that's destroyed the health system, that made the health system quite weak. And because of the consequences of this earthquake, that made actually the remaining health facilities are under unbearable pressure to treat this huge or massive amounts of patients coming to this area. As you said, indeed, the humanitarian access reaching northwest Syria was very late. Actually, the Syrian population through the east, the Arab tribes in East Euphrates managed to send much more trucks of aid and relief than the UN and international organization managed to do during the last 8 days, which is mainly because of the policy of one humanitarian access that is managed through the Security Council mechanism, and also the vulnerable and weak humanitarian situation before this conflict. For us, as MSF, Doctors Without Borders, we managed actually to intervene a bit quick and fast at the beginning with what we have in every project. We are operating like a small stock, what we call emergency preparedness stock.
Yeah.
We use this emergency preparedness stock as much as we could in a way to deal with the first phase of the mass casualty plans that we were arranging at that time.
And you know, we talk about the different stages. Obviously, in the immediate aftermath of any disaster, that's when aid is needed the most, because then the problems, as we've seen happen in Syria, can start to be compounding, right? We've seen cholera already there. And I want to ask you, with all that in mind, Reem, I don't want to talk about the blame game per se, but where do you put the blame in terms of how to prevent this from continuing to happen? It seems like Syrians have been very vocal online, and the Arab communities online responding to that in the absence of real organization amongst governments or the Syrian government.
Sure, I think the blame is on the lack of political solution. We shouldn't have been in this situation in the first place. I think because there was no political solution, we ended up with Syria divided to 3 different parts. And in addition to all my colleagues have mentioned about the obstacles, the logistics, the indifference, I would like also to talk about different sets of reasons. In northwest of Syria, I think the biggest issue is that there is no state. And what it became clear from the response of the international community that all the emergency international response is prepared and designed around working with the state at the receiving end. They cannot respond to ungoverned spaces or spaces governed with rebel governance. So they wanted a state, a decision maker on the other side to give access, insurance, etc., and that is not there. The second thing also is the presence of a terrorist organization in this area, which is why so many donors already withdrew from this area and cut their support to pure minimum humanitarian support. So they're already out of the area, not wanting to access it. And also accessing Northwest, sadly, was hostage to geopolitics, to decision from different states, including Turkey, which was delaying some of the decisions to access the country. In the government-controlled area, there's a different problem. There is a state, but it's kind of illegitimate state, and it's cut off from the rest of the world. So all the countries, international community want to access, they have to restart the communication.
Sure, and that's what's happening. And Dr. Zahid, it looked like you wanted to jump in. Go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I agree with many points that Reem has mentioned. But people imagine that Syria is one country, but it's divided to 4 parts. Each one of them has their governing body. This area in northwest of Syria is under the control of the rebels. It's accessed only through Turkey, through one border crossing before this disaster, and now there's 3 border crossing. So it's an open air prison that has been suffering for the past 12 years because of the war, because of the siege from the Assad regime. The people inside this area in Syria perceive the Assad regime and Russia, of course, and Iran as their enemies. So they will not accept any assistance, even if it's offered from the Assad regime. It's like you're giving Putin an assistance and telling them, give it to the Ukrainian. So this is how the Syrians in that area perceive the Assad regime. It's been bombing them nonstop for the past 12 years. And clearly, there is lack of political will in the international community. Turkey has been very helpful before the crisis, directing all aid across the border, but Turkey has to deal with a disaster of its own. You have more than 20 million Turkish citizens who've been affected by this area in southern Turkey. Many of the roads leading to the border crossing have been destroyed. So what is needed really is to lift Syria as a priority to the international community. You know, in the United States, they were saying, we cannot sympathize with Syrians because it's a civil war. Now you have an earthquake. Now you can sympathize easily.
Right, and I wish we could, you know, somehow extricate the politics out of this and actually facilitate the emergency aid they need, but also the more lasting aid. With that in mind, and with everything you just outlined there, Dr. Zahid, I want to share with you some thoughts that were echoed by Muzna Duraid, she's the Senior Program Development Officer for the White Helmets, who are kind of accusing Bashar al-Assad specifically of manipulating this disaster for his needs. Take a listen.
Bashar al-Assad and Russia blackmail and manipulate the international community and put a pressure on this area because it's a opposition-led area, and the hypocrisy of the international community that allows for a dictator and for the Syrian regime to block this aid even when we have like a natural disaster. So this is like a clear politicalizations, and we have seen that the international aid arrives depends on the victim's identity, not depends on the needs.
Reem, I want to draw your attention to my computer screen. This is a post on Instagram from Kim Ghattas. It's her article in the Financial Times. In it, she says that Bashar al-Assad is, rehabilitating himself with the international community while posing for pictures in a disaster zone with his wife. She goes on to talk about, how, so many people feel as though, as we heard in the top, that Syrians have been forgotten. There's a lack of political will, and that's allowing people to sort of exploit this disaster. With that in mind, where should our attention be in terms of tangibly trying to bring the humanitarian aid that's needed?
I think it should be based on the people, on the needs, like my friend Muzna just said. It has to be needs-based, not politicians-based. I think the actors in each area have been trying to exploit the situation politically, including al-Jolani, the head of the interim government, and indeed the Syrian regime. But the focus has to be on the people. They have to be given priority, and on the incredible tsunami of civil society we've seen. This is like, we just didn't imagine that despite everything, 12 years on, the Syrian civil society has this energy, this power. They just rose from under the ashes. They were acting everywhere, in every area, across all conflict lines. The attention has to be them. They need to be supported. They need to be the new carrier of kind of new Syria, the monitors of any help, the implementers of any assistance. So I think that's where we need to focus, and we should ignore all these politicians trying to exploit the situation to their own ends.
Yeah, well, I see all three of you nodding there. Go ahead, Dr. Zahar.
Again, Ahmed, I agree with Reem on this issue. As an organization that working in the humanitarian sphere, not only in Syria, but in Ukraine, in Bangladesh, in Yemen, and Sudan, we deal with situations that many entities want to politicize the reason. We know that humanitarian aid was weaponized by the Assad regime when they sieged Ghouta and Zabadani and Madaya, and we had starvation in these areas. We had patients with severe malnutrition a few years ago, and Syrians did not forget this. But as a humanitarian, we want to make sure that the aid reaches the people that in need based on the priorities. So we partner with local community. We ask them what are the priorities. Right now, the priorities are food and medicine and shelter. Next few weeks from now, we're going to be clean water, because the water sources have been contaminated with sewage, and we had cholera outbreak just a few weeks away from now. Right. And we still have this cholera outbreak. So we expect this to get worse. So mental health support, especially for the children and the victims who are right now without homes in this area. So mental health should be a priority. So to us, the priorities of the local community are our priorities, regardless who are the actors who are trying to manipulate the aid.
Most certainly. And Sherman,
exactly.
Go ahead, Sherman.
Exactly. Thank you very much. Actually, I totally agree with Dr. Zahar and with Reem, with everything they said. I want to come back to the points of the mental health. Mental health is one of the biggest needs. I actually started my work in the humanitarian field as a translator for psychologists. I was talking to a lot of people who've been through different stage of trauma. In the last 12 years, this unbearable situation led to a miserable humanitarian situation for the people living in all control areas. Let's not forget that. So us as MSF, we are trying to be in every place we can be. We have presence in northeast Syria. We are working in Al-Hol camp, in Al-Hasake, in Raqqa, in Kobani. At the same time, we are working in the opposition control area, whether in the area under control of the Syrian National Army. So we are in Azaz, in different districts of Aleppo. We are in Aleppo countryside. We are in Idlib. In the areas under control of the Syrian National Army, the area under control of the Salvation government. Why I brought all of this? I brought all of this because that show how the fragmented is the Syrian situation. Besides the proxy war that's going on in the country, for us, we are trying to, like one of the main reasons actually for this situation to reach this degree before the earthquake. I mean, it's 12 years of earthquakes, actually. It's not only an earthquake that made the situation horrible. It's a continuous humanitarian disaster that is going on. But before that, there was Syria fatigue in media. Yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of media platforms and also a lot of people, they didn't want to hear more about Syria. Yeah. We need to take this opportunity.
Go ahead.
Yes,
yeah, I just want to add to this very important point about mental health. I think now we have almost everyone who went through this earthquake is having post-traumatic stress disorder. And we started seeing the symptoms. People on the social media are talking about living the earthquake again and again, having all the classic symptoms of PTSD. And the sad thing is PTSD is not even talked about before. People don't even know about it, never heard about it. They don't know that what they're going through is actually a syndrome. It has symptoms, and there are ways to kind of handle it. So we need to raise awareness about it, have content in Arabic to spread about PTSD, to help, because no organization will be able to respond on its own to this massive need. People need to learn how to help themselves and how to help their relatives and friends and children. I mean, children also are very, very vulnerable to really, the shock they went through. It will have lasting impacts on them. It will always stay there.
To prove the point you are saying, actually, I'm in touch with my family, which is inside Syria. I have my mother, my brother, my sister. My sister has two beautiful boys, 4-year-olds and 6-year-olds. I mean, my nephews they're refusing to sleep in their rooms. They are every night saying, Mom, the house will be shaking. My mom, until yesterday, we managed to let her go to her house, even though the house, luckily there are some cracks, but it's according to the people who came and look at it, it's quite safe. But she's feeling that every day the ground is shaking under her. All of that, besides the fact that there is no hope that the situation will improve, and everybody is concerned and afraid that tomorrow the world will forget again what happened in Syria. This earthquake euphoria, all these people taking a look at the media, and everybody is interested now, will lose their interest in 3 months. And then we will come back to the previous situation. We should do our best not to end up in that situation.
I want to share with you and bring in a voice all the way from Australia. This was a video comment sent to us by Opdyke, a humanitarian engineer with experience doing this kind of important work after disasters. Take a listen.
Humanitarian organizations are struggling to access these areas. So just this past weekend, there was still only one border crossing from Turkey into Syria. So with the Syrian government now permitting additional border crossings for aid to reach affected communities in opposition-held areas, but this is still challenging for those organizations. So really the key to this response moving forward will be supporting local organizations such as the Syrian Red Crescent, the Syrian Civil Defense Force, the White Helmets, and we've really seen these organizations be instrumental over the last decade of conflict in Syria.
Dr. Zaher, obviously those organizations are instrumental, but in such a fractured state where there's no clear authority, are they really able to operate, especially when the world's focus is not on them, as it is after this earthquake?
I can say proudly, yes. So MedGlobe, my organization, have been in Syria, northwest part of Syria, for the past 12 years, providing support to healthcare system, to hospitals, to clinics. We started mobile clinic just 1 day after the earthquake to provide healthcare to the people who are now without shelter. Our hospitals have been working nonstop, performed more than 700 surgeries for trauma cases. We distributed diesel fuel because there is no electricity. Every other NGO that has been working in Syria has been doing work nonstop. And I think it's important to highlight the work of humanitarian worker and the fact that this earthquake also affected their mental health. Yeah. Sometimes we forget that doctors and nurses are human like us, and they are also affected.
Dr. Zaher, I'm so glad that you brought that up. We actually have a video featuring some doctors who are kind of really just candidly expressing their reality and how they too are suffering. Take a listen.
Because of the strong earthquake, oxygen cylinders fell on the surgical endoscopy device and the mobile C-arm, which caused these devices to malfunction. These devices are absolutely necessary in emergency cases or during disasters, no orthopedic surgery can be performed without the mobile C-arm device.
Unfortunately, colleagues from Jebla's medical cadres died under rubble. Some members of the ambulance crew died because they were in a building which collapsed.
I mean, Dr. Zahir, I have to ask you, when you hear those doctors and, knowing that so many hospitals have been destroyed, that you've been delivering fuel to these hospitals because it's so needed, I wonder, where do you have hope that, what do you think needs to happen for this to be, as the months come, as things as the attention fades away, what is the most important mechanism to ensure that the people are as protected as they can be, given so much vulnerability?
The most important thing is for programs like you and Al Jazeera and other media outlets to keep spotting attention on Syria and other disaster regions. The second thing, people are resilient in Syria and other places of the world. Dr. Ahmed Al-Ghandour, who's the head of our hospital in Darkush, he mentioned that he was traumatized with his the group of doctors and nurses because they took care of a child who survived the earthquake and climbed from under the rubbles, and he was trying with his bare hands to lift the stones so his dad and mom and brothers can survive, and he could not.
Yeah.
So he was traumatized. Everyone around him was traumatized. Yeah. But they continued to work, and the fact that we are paying attention to them will keep them working. If we leave Syria to be a priority in the U.S. administration, because Biden administration ignored it, that will make a difference to the Syrian people.
Most certainly.
Unless Syria become a priority, then things will happen like this.
And I think also, I agree with Zahir, but I also would like to add that we need a big shift in the donors' policy approach towards Syria. Actually, for 12 years, they've been responding to Syria as if it is an ongoing earthquake. They were just delivering the minimum humanitarian aid needed without any prospect for a long-term plan. And we see the result of this now. I mean, many people died in the Northwest because there were no building regulations.
Right.
People were building on whatever, and there is no one to monitor and to check that everything is built according to rules. And now, while I agree with your guest from Sydney that we need to support organizations like the White Helmet, Red Crescent, but every institution has its capacity and they cannot expand just like this overnight. There are so many organizations need to be supported. Also, the mandate of this organization is important now, like the White Helmet and others. But moving forward, we need somebody to rebuild these schools, these houses. We need different organizations, and we need to build them. And we need to also stress from now good governance, conditionality based on respecting human rights, upscale monitoring evaluation, all what is needed to build institutional structures. Without institutions, the society is going to be vulnerable again. Syria and all its part is going to be vulnerable again. And donors, US, UK, everyone need to focus on institutional building across Syria.
Certainly a salient point to end on. We have just 1 minute left. Sherwin, I want to ask you, I know your mother's in Syria and you spoke to us about how she's struggling. Any personal stories you can share with us before we wrap here?
I think, there are many personal stories. The same thing related to what Dr. Zahir said. So also our colleagues in Idlib area, they are in Opdyke, the same thing. One of them, actually, we unfortunately lost his life during this earthquake. And also the others were trying to take care of their family, taking their family, their baby, their wives to the reception center, to somewhere safe, and going back to the warehouse where we are having our relief aid. We're trying to deliver the kit, the trauma kit, the surgical kit that these hospitals needed. I just want also to take advantage of this moment to tell you
just very quickly, we're running out of time.
Thank you very much. It's very important not to lose this spotlight on Syria. We should not forget the situation. Humanitarian access should not be closed 3 months later. People should have access to aid. People deserve this. Thank you.
And we want to thank you for being part of this conversation, for joining us, for sharing your insights with us. Certainly a conversation we'll continue to follow here at the stream. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you to Zahir, Sherwan, and Dream. See you next time.